Welcome to the Black on Black Education Podcast, where we interview the most brilliant minds
and connected hearts to discuss our shared passion for the transformation,
the revolution,
reimagining,
and recreation
of education in the Black community.
My name is Eva Loren Jean Charles, founder of Black on Black Education and New York City high school teacher.
And I'm Jamal Thomas, her partner and dad, education enthusiast.
And we're your hosts. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
And most importantly, to enjoy the episode.
Hello. Welcome back to the Black on Black Education Podcast. We are happy to have you back and happy to have another guest to breathe life into us on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. So who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
I am Tinia Merriweather, and I am an educator, and I teach because it is my calling. I would say who I am, but one of my pandemic ponderings is to have a life outside of just what you do, to actually have some space to be. But teaching is a really critical part of my identity, something that I love, something that I think hopefully will be part of my legacy. So that's who I am. And also in my other life, I'm also a psychologist. And I'm still figuring out how that part plays out. But that's who I am.
Okay. I mean, this is going to be an interesting conversation. One, I will say that I'm going to be using pandemic ponderings at some point in time. You know, I'm going to think about what my ponderings were. So thank you for that one. But the two things obviously connect, you know, like psychologist and what goes on in school. And so we know that you have been in a classroom, for 26 years. And at the same time that right now we have all kinds of people saying, you know what, I'm out of here. Like that, I mean, we hear about teacher shortages and things to that effect. What is it that's made you say, that let me continue this work?
Great question. Well, first of all, it's now 27. I'm on year 27 in the classroom. 26 years completed. And, the great resignation, as it's talked about, like in the wider, like economic space, what that looks like in higher ed and what that looks like in K through 12 ed. I'm not going to say I haven't pondered what that looks like, because I love teaching. And I'm like at the point in my career, I'm like, do I need to love it all day, every day? Or could I love it on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons? And because honestly, the last couple of years have been hard. And it's not like it was like frolicking in the park before 3 years ago, because has always been a challenging career. And that's one of the things I've loved about it, that it's something that you can do year after year, and reach some level of expertise, but you can always have a fresh challenge. You can always be presented, even if you're teaching the same class, can change it up. You're going to have new students. The context of the world is going to be different. Yeah. And so I love that in all of my years of doing it, I've never been bored. Like, I'm never bored at work. Even one of the things I teach currently is 7th grade ethics, and that's a quarter class at the school where I teach. And so now I'm on it's a quarter class, so they don't have it the whole year. It like rotates. So I have a group of students for about 8 weeks. And so I think I'm on like 58 quarters of 7th grade ethics that I've been teaching. And as I tell them, it's always different. So even though I'm teaching the same social justice content, so like I know I'm going to do a lesson about racial identity. I know I'm going to do a lesson about gender identity. I know I'm going to do a lesson about youth activism. But each group of kids, even if it's the same school year, like the fall first group I have versus the spring group, like there's going to be something different that's happened in the world. There's going to be they're going to be older. So October 7th graders, when they're like 12 turning 13, are very different from smelling themselves seventh graders in May who are turning 14 and now know everything there is to know. And so I love teaching because of that. And during the, not last school year, but the school year before that, mid-pandemic, I happened to teach at a school that chose to go with an every other week structure. And they also gave many of us accommodations to work from home. And that year that I taught from home, granted, had many, many, many challenges in teaching online and, you know, all of that. But it made me start to think about like, a career where you don't actually have to go to work and be there in person all day. While I definitely think that's, you know, critical for students. And I know that, like, I know the kids really, you know, appreciated the weeks that they were in school more and they love seeing their friends and having downtime. But I would even hear some of them say things like, oh, I'm so glad I'm remote next week. I'm so exhausted. Like the fact that 8:30 when you're remote means they were setting their alarms for 8:25 and then turning the
Me too, little boy.
Versus 8:30 when you have to take a shower, get on the bus and get there. Like, you know, everybody's tired first period, but they were so much more tired. But anyway, it just started me thinking about how schools could change and adapt to keep people from wanting to do the Great Resignation. Because in so many other fields, people are like able, like other professionals are able to work from home. And there were some things about working from home that I really appreciated. And I know that like, if I stay in education, am I going to be able to have that? So like, I mean, I get that we sacrifice our personal comfort for what's best for our students. But I think educators are called on time and time and time again to like, oh, for the good of the kids, we need to do this. For the good of the kids, we need to do that. And another pandemic pondering is, you know, how can I still show up for them, but show up for myself as well? How do I save for myself and not burn out, right? Because kids don't need burnout teachers who are exhausted. And they need teachers who have the emotional capacity to handle their own lives and situations. And so I don't know, it's a thing I've been thinking about. And I'm like, well, maybe if the world of education doesn't try to continue to adopt a model from several generations ago of like, and I mean, I teach at a school that starts at 8:30, but I know the school where I went for high school starts at 7:25 still.
Yes.
I'm like, and you know, and I get that some districts are sharing buses, so like the high schoolers start at 7:25 so they can drop them off, go back and pick up the junior high schoolers, and they start at 7:55 and go back and pick up the elementary school so they can start at 8:30. But like, when are we gonna say, like, who wants to have to be at work at 6 something in the morning? Like, no kids want that. No teachers.
I mean, it's also just not what's good for them, right? Like it's so interesting the way that we take some information from some places and then take other information and allow it to make the decision around what we do, right? So like research has told us time and time again, adolescents do not operate well in the morning. But we decided that school needs to be in the morning because Horace Mann decided it needed to be in the morning and all throughout the day because of the system and the economy that we had set up during that time when the public education system was created, right? And so like there are so many things that were in there. And I think, and I wonder when all the research comes out about why teachers are leaving the classroom in droves right now, I wonder how much of it is just the pondering about like, wow, I don't have to give almost all of my life to doing this thing. Like my first year of teaching was during the pandemic when we were completely remote. And so like in the beginning, I was like, this is terrible for these reasons, but this is also great for these reasons. Like I got to be home with my dog. Like I got to go outside in the middle of the day. I got to like actually cook lunch. Like there were all of these small pieces of things that you really enjoyed. And that like, now that I'm back in the classroom full time, I come home and I am like dead to the world, like so tired, got up early, did that commute, did all the things. And I just think that like some of the pieces of what you're saying are so important, because I don't know that I've really thought deeply through how much that time might have just given educators an option that they never saw for themselves before. So I appreciate that piece of what you said, for sure.
And what's going to be a tweetable there is do I need to love it all day every day? Like you just started out with some of the education innovation thoughts and ideas that that I have. So I'm somebody who I'm on my local school board, but I can't be a teacher. I think me even go back and forth with this. I don't have teacher training. I don't I don't know what my pedagogy would be, but I'm pretty darn good with kids. I think particularly like younger ones. So I think it's something that I would love to do. What if the education space allowed for the type of innovation where even the people who go and say that teaching is what they're going to want to be full time, or that they don't want to do it full time, that they can do it in more limited pieces, but they have something valuable to offer the students because they are really incredible at teaching about digital literacy, you know what I mean? And they can do those things via videos and let their videos go be a part of massive amounts of classrooms around the country. So like we have the technology to allow for these things, but somewhere somehow at the policy levels, it's like we have to keep doing what we've always done. And so it brings up kind of the question is like, what does it mean to even be a teacher? What does that? We all are teachers in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Why can't more people get the opportunity, without saying that they are tied to this for the rest of their life in this way for 50 to 60 to 70 hours a week, which I know some teachers do? What if people got to just drop small gems on students, and they do something else with a part of their time, and that we organize the school buildings and the learning spaces to allow for that. So I'm wondering if that's something that you've ever considered or thought about.
So I actually have two responses to that. So in addition to my full-time job, I'm also an adjunct professor at NYU in the Department of Applied Psychology, and I've been teaching grad students. So in that world, like there's obviously a huge problem with the adjunctification, if that's a word, of the teaching populace of higher education.
Yeah.
Adjuncts make very, very, very little money. They don't have job security. Like there are, adjuncts who are very close to the poverty line with PhDs, like that whole issue. But to the point of I get to drop in for one day a week for 3 hours and do what I want to do and have this conversation and still have a full-time job. I love adjuncting and I love my conversations I have with my grad students. The only way I'm ever able to do it is because I have another job. And like, I wonder if in K through 12 hasn't really had an adjunct model, but like the adjunct model is actually a really bad thing for higher ed, right? And like, but like, the whole tenure process is built on research and, like there's a lot of reasons why it's happening. And, people aren't making a living wage. And, a lot of folks with a whole lot of education haven't really focused on pedagogy and building those skills. And as a person who actually double majored in education in undergrad, so I was a child development major and an elementary ed major. So having studied the process of teaching, the art of teaching, the science of teaching, the craft of teaching, it is something that I hold in high esteem. And though I believe that everyone can teach you something and that in many ways everyone can be an educator, I also want to carve out space for the people who have dedicated their life and continue to do professional development, to continue to study, to be educators. So the other part of my question is making me think about recent, I want to say Arizona and Florida and their policies of you don't have to finish college yet. You can maybe start teaching, or maybe if you don't have a degree, but you served in the military. I get there's a teacher shortage and I know that they need people who are mature, And I also feel like it's a slippery slope, and it's very dangerous to start to decredential the field. But I also say that as a person who has a critique of gatekeeping, right? And so it's hard to have both, but I think we need to think about how do we have high standards for the people that we want to show up in our classrooms.
Yeah.
But we have to ask who defines the standards and what are they based on, right? Because some of the gatekeeping is, puts up barriers for why we don't see a lot of folks who look like us or not. No, we do see a lot. We just don't see enough Black teachers in the classroom. I know that we still haven't reached our pre-Brown versus Board of Education levels.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of structural factors of why those teachers lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And why, as things got quote unquote better, make sure you see those quotes or hear those quotes, that like once people start to have other options, if you're going to be a college educated professional, it's not like you can only be a teacher or a minister these days. Like now you could do so many different things. And I remember when I told my parents, I've known I was going to be a teacher since I was in kindergarten. And I remember telling my parents that multiple times. And they were like, well, you're going to change your mind 100 times before you're an adult. And I'm like, no, I'm going to be a teacher. No, I really want to be a teacher. And like, but you're so good at math and science. Don't you want to be an engineer? And I'm like, I am good at math. Should I be a teacher? Because don't we need teachers who are good at math and science?
Yeah.
And both my parents worked for Procter & Gamble and corporate America. And I remember one time my mom was saying that like, there was a time where that's all you could be, but like you could be anything, Tinia. And I've decided that anything I want to be is a teacher. But I know that there's a lot of folks who don't choose that because, who wants to be overworked and underpaid and underrespected and, have people not think that you're smart. I even remember in college, my friends just were like, oh, your major's so easy. Oh, that's why you have good grades because you have such an easy major. I'm like, you think it's easy to learn how to do this? So, there's a lot of reasons why people might not want to choose education. I still feel like it's the best choice I could have made. It's a career that I love. And then if you stay in it long enough, you can finally start making some money. Like, I mean, I'm not bawling, but like, I definitely make a comfortable salary now, but like, it takes 27 years to get there.
Yeah.
And you have to wait 27 years.
Yeah. I think it's so much of like what we prioritize, right? So you can say that like, okay, I'm going to give a job to someone who doesn't have the credential, who doesn't even have the passion for doing this work, right? But then we're not recognizing that like, yeah, maybe I do only stay in the classroom for 5 years, but I've created this impact. I've left this legacy. I've done this thing in this school or in this education system. And like people deserve to be compensated for that. And I think that we've in education, there's this really, really terrible ideology that like in order for you to make it a livable wage, you have to be able to stay in it for long enough. And you can't stay in it for long enough because it's not sustainable because you are not making enough money. And so it's just like this cycle that put us into the situation that we're currently in. And so I think that so much to what you're speaking to is highlighting and amplifying like the reason for us to have some real critical conversations, not just like in silos in this particular space, because we know that a lot of people who listen to this podcast are listening to it because they agree with us, right? Because they're looking for the diverse perspectives of people who already agree that there is a problem that needs to be changed. But now it's like, how do we amplify the voices of the people who recognize this issue and have thoughts about what the solutions look like and bring those to the people who are actually making the decisions? Because when the news headlines are saying every other day that we are in a crisis because of how few teachers that we have to educate our children, and we're putting band-aids over that issue by putting people into the classroom that have no reason that they should be there, and I'm sure gonna lead to so many other issues down the line. I think that it's unfortunate that there's still not this critical consciousness socially in our society right now around like, why is this a problem? who has the answers to solving this problem, and like how are we going to create new priorities in order to make the adjustments that need to be made. I want to talk a little bit about how we met. And so we met, I think I DM'd you on Zoom chat during a Lincoln Center did an arts and social imagination program. And we were discussing issues around like schools and the incessant need for them to like place control on children. And the reason that I bring this up here is because I'm thinking so much about like, the military has a very particular thought process around how we should behave and in what ways we should behave and when we should speak and how we should walk and how we should move. And not to say that everybody who is going to be brought in from the military in places like Florida and Arizona and Texas that are in this major crisis and they're trying to find a solution for it. I just want you to talk a little bit about like that incessant need for control and like the ways that you have been able to do the opposite of that in your classroom, and the importance of doing the opposite of that in your classroom. That's the question, full stop.
Well, I think I want to respond to what we were talking about earlier, and actually to also your dad's question. Because one of the things I thought about is one of the reasons why I've been able to stay so long is because of the types of schools where I've taught. And I guess I should out myself as an independent school educator, which doesn't mean that I don't believe in public education, because I believe deeply in it. And I also believe that a lot of what I've been able to do in my career and things that happen at the schools where I've taught are not the things that cost over $60,000 a year, which is what it costs to go to the school where I teach. And so we have many, many, many resources. We have small class sizes. We have a lot of support. So actually the teaching shortage isn't actually hitting schools like mine, right? People want to work at a school like Fieldston because we get paid well. We have free breakfast and lunch. We have a free omelet bar at school before. We have valet parking. We have, some stuff is, it's not valet parking just because they want to spoil us. It's because we fit twice as many cars in our parking lot as are meant to be there. But like things like that, whereas other schools where like people are circling and like they can't park or they have to, like some of the inconveniences are taken out of the equation at a school like mine. There is always food in the faculty room because people tend to be in a better mood when they are not hungry, right? And so our school provides food for kids and for adults. It is free to us. It's part of the kids' tuition, so it's not like anybody has to like pay for. So those little things can make it more comfortable to stay for a long time. And to get to your question about military and control, also in these spaces, they are places that have freedom. Right. So one of the other things that has kept me in education is I've been able to teach what I want to teach pretty much my entire career. And I know that's not true many places. Even from my first few years of school, it was like, here is the closet of all our books. So I started as an elementary teacher, and it was like, here's your reading group of 7 kids that you have for an hour. And then you're going to have 7 more kids for an hour, because there's 5 of us and we're splitting all the 3rd graders while the 4th graders are in their music enrichment class. But it was like, which books do you want to teach? Like, I picked the books. I picked the units. I was like, oh, we're making a play about the witches by Roald Dahl. Oh, we're going to do this. And being able to do that for my entire career is something that I love and that has allowed me to be able to experiment. So back to Lincoln Center where we met, from my very first year of teaching, we had a partnership with Lincoln Center. So every year we brought in several works of art. We got to take our kids to museums, and we brought artists in and shows in. And so using the arts and social imagination just became part of how I teach. And we've had a lot of support for professional development. So I love going to Lincoln Center workshops. And I used to do it every summer. I used to spend 3 weeks every summer at the beginning part of my career when I taught at Friends Academy in Long Island, because my school invested in me being able to do that. And so over the time, I've been able to see that, like, wow, the students really open up, and even things that were not initially accessible to them. I'm thinking of a unit we did on Bharatanatyam. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is classical Indian dance, which I knew nothing about before this Lincoln Center performance came in. We had partnered with a teaching artist. At the time, I was teaching 6th grade English, but like watching my students see that performance with them being able to ask informed, critical questions because they learned how to appreciate the aesthetic possibilities from that kind of education has freed them up in other types of ways. And so I would imagine that not just like bringing in folks from the military, no shade to the military, and I'm nonviolent, but thank you for your service. Like if you are coming from a place where it's like at whatever 1,300 hours you have to do this and eat this and this kind of corners, and when I was home like 2 weeks ago in Cincinnati, and I was at a funeral of one of my parents' friends, and he happened to have served in the military, and so like that really sad part where they play taps and they fold the flag, but like just the level of precision of like the flag must be this and take these steps, but like, and for that kind of ceremony, like I think it works, but if you want to apply that level of precision to a classroom full of 14-year-olds, like they're not like folded like this corner, they want to be like, well, what would happen if I folded it the other way? And can I shake it out first? Or, like,
and like some of our kids would be like, and what would happen if I burn it? And what would happen if I cut it up? And what would happen if I made an art piece out of it? And what would and there are so many things that like, again, and we're not going to sit here and talk about like teacher prep and the issues that exist within teacher prep and how they're taught to teach teachers how to control people. But it's just been, it's so important to be intentional about the things that we're doing, because young people are meant to like explore and be and think and like question. And when you don't have any basis, or to your point, speaking so heavily about professional development and how there is an increased amount of professional development that's supporting educators in changing their mindset and their thinking around a lot of this stuff, I just appreciate so much like the detail in which you're going into some of this, because I don't think that people are recognizing how detailed oriented it is in us being intentional around what changes that we make so that we can support students in being creative in the ways that you're talking about. I'm so sorry to have cut you off, but like, it's just, I'm listening and I'm just like, wow, we need to be holding on to some of these pieces, because we can't just pick what works out of a whole nother context and think that it's going to work in a completely different context and setting that has a completely different purpose.
I mean, I think they think there's so many, thoughts and things, like happening right now related to what you said, because one, yes, two different contexts, the population that you deal with and the word advantage that they step into school with, which prepares their brains in a better way to be open to things that some of the students and Black and brown students don't necessarily have in many of our schools. The idea that many of these military people probably don't know what they're doing from a pedagogical perspective, but so are many teachers who are in the classroom right now. There's plenty of them who suck too. So I don't know how we wrestle with all of the the things, and it sounds like you're doing some of that, because on one hand you said that you recognize that I think you said the dangers of credentialization, whatever it is, that danger versus the danger of not letting people who perhaps would be phenomenal in the classroom have an opportunity, because they're just not going to go to school for 4 years. Like it's just not going to happen. And it is a wrestle. It's a dance. It's something we need to talk through. It's something we need to communicate through. It's something we need to create through. because there probably are ways to determine which one of these military people probably should not be in the classroom, as well as there's ways to determine which people who don't necessarily have that credential might be, maybe there's a way that they can show that they have some natural inclination towards a thing, and then there can be some models and some. I don't think that most people are saying don't give these people any training at all, because that would obviously be crazy. But that there's training that's less than 4 years, and then this just comes all the way back to the idea of what education needs to look like today. It just needs to be way more flexible. It needs to be, like what we're talking about right now. And no, this is not the best for you, but this is the best for you. Finding out which students are going to be, like there's some students that flag, folding and things to that effect. I was the student, I'm everywhere. I'm crazy. Like, what I mean? That and teachers felt like, like, what am I going to do with this kid? You know what I mean? So I needed some flag folding stuff, you know what I mean, to be added in there as well. But there are other people who absolutely need just some open space to run and not feel so constrained and things to that effect. So you talked about being an applied psychologist, and I do wonder how that has affected how you work with young people, and how you could determine what he needs versus what she needs versus what they need versus what whomever it is like needs.
So there's so much I want to respond to, but I'll answer your question first, and then I'll try to get back to some of these other points. So actually, my research is about classroom level processes and equitable opportunities for learning, right? And this idea of what one person needs and what another person needs. I think there's a lot that's going on in classrooms, and when I went to school, I had already been a teacher full time for 11 years to get my PhD, and I taught throughout my program. And so there was a point where my teacher brain was like way ahead of my psychologist brain, and I'm like, all right, so social scientists, they want very clean research designs where like this variable, that variable, I'm like, but that's not how it happens in classrooms. And had I chosen something more simple for my dissertation, I would have graduated sooner. But I knew too much as a teacher. But I started thinking about the ways that students get opportunities in classrooms. And it's not just did you raise your hand and did I call on you? But if they're back in the day, probably when we were in school, where it was like, oh, you could do the film projector, you get to do the loops, or we're going on a field trip, you get to go to the office and get the keys and bring it back because me. So even I get to do the favor for the teacher. I get to just things that show responsibility. The teacher trusts me. I also want to answer this with a newer role, which is as auntie. So I have two nibblings. I have a niece who is starting kindergarten this year, and I actually got to go to her kindergarten orientation. And I heard her principal and assistant principal talk about something that they called the WIN program. And they said they want every student to win, but WIN is actually an acronym for what I need. And so they are really trying, and this is a public school. It's a suburban public school. They call it diverse, but I'll leave that there. But I was really impressed with the fact that they actually have time built in the schedule for students who need more enrichment. They get what they need. For students who need extra intervention, they get what they need. For the student who needs to run around, they might get what they need. Some kids get one-on-one instruction. Some kids get small group instruction. Then, so I was curious about how they're going to play it out. But I love the idea that they're striving for that at Blue Ash Elementary School. Some of the other stuff I wanted to go back to in terms of the credentials. I have an example so remember when I was saying the year before last, I taught from home. One of the reasons why I was able to teach from home, though my students were there in school, was that they gave us one-to-one proctors. And shout out to Aubrey Calabras, who was my proctor, who is a DJ and an audio technician. And so had never worked in education, never did anything like it. But in the pandemic, you can imagine that if you do things like DJing and audio techs for different shows, you don't have work.
Sorry, a proctor, is that just the person who can tell me what that is?
So that was it's not a great term, but like my school hired over 100 proctors of adults to be in the classroom while certain teachers were teaching from home. So it was his role to make sure, like, he would pull me up on the smart board so the students in the room could see me and hear me, but they were also all logged into the computer because half of them were home anyway. But like also make sure at the beginning that they stayed 6 feet apart, that they had their masks on, that they wiped the desks in between classes, etc. Aubrey, who had never taught before, was amazing with the kids, right? And so if there was a way for him to be a teacher, how do we open the gates so that folks who have life experience are good with, DJs are good with crowd control, but in fun ways. And like people who work in stage productions are have a lot of organizational management skills of okay, this mic needs to be up now, all of those kinds of those problem solving things. So he would be an excellent teacher. But he is not credentialed. But so how do we make space for people like Aubrey? And the other thing I wanted to say that came to me about the flag conversation is it made me think about Colin Kaepernick, which he still doesn't have a job in the NFL, right? But I remember when this was really in the news a lot. I remember walking into my 7th grade classroom, and in this class, I happened to have 2 Black boys, and I still remember because I remember what happened. But one of the things about these independent schools is a lot of times they end up having more racial diversity than public schools because of the segregation and how people live, whatever. And the school where I teach has a very robust financial aid program and commitment to equity, blah, blah, blah. And so we do have about 40% students of color, some of whom are also very wealthy, and then some of whom not so much. But anyway, when I remember a lesson that I don't normally teach about the flag, but I try to bring in contextual issues. And one day I walked in the classroom and I just put a knee down. And immediately the 7th graders, so many of their hands flew up, and they're like, I know why you're kneeling because of Colin Kaepernick, whatever. But the fact that I have the freedom to walk in the classroom and use a knee. And I was like, okay, so let's Google, why are people kneeling? What's happening in the world? What are the words to the Star Spangled Banner? Oh, we sing this verse. Oh, what's in that verse we don't sing? But it makes me think about a t-shirt I saw on vacation. That's what brought this to mind. I happen to be in Florida, SMH at Florida. And I saw somebody with a t-shirt that said, I stand for the flag because of whatever it was, because people died for the flag. And I think sometimes we can get too binary in our thinking, so the military is this, and I don't think kids think like that. And hopefully we can teach them not to think like that. Yeah. But it does make me nervous that if we think oh, you got to stand for if you are so interested in the precision of you got to respect this flag, never mind that it doesn't stand for liberty and justice for all. At least I haven't seen that in our history. And then you can't critique it, right? So those laws against critical race theory or being able to ask these kind of critical questions, and you don't say gay, don't ask these questions, don't look at the history. How do we shape the society we want? How do we envision the world if we can't have these conversations? And we need people in the classroom who can actually have nuanced conversations. So if you feel so strongly because the flag has to be folded like this and it has to be like this and it has to be precise, if you can also be like, oh, can we talk about why some folks might not want to stand for the flag? Can we talk about why Colin Kaepernick still doesn't have a job in the NFL, even though they apologize? Like if you can't have those types of conversations with nuance, then you probably don't need to be in the classroom. Right? Even if you have
the conversation in the classroom that needed to be the conversation that the country had. And our institutions did not allow for that because people watch this or they watch that and they had the conversation this way and they had the conversation another way. And it's I'm just going to keep saying it. I tell people all the time, civil society is not promised. If we do not do a better job of doing what you did in the classroom with those young people, and if we don't do that everywhere, our country is going to fall apart. It's good. Like there is no, it will happen. So the spirit with which you brought to the classroom, salute, because it's what's needed everywhere. And we have to find ways to make sure that this is happening, not just in classrooms where you somehow feel like you get this extra license, where teachers have license to do exactly what it is that you did.
Well, and I do feel like there are classrooms everywhere where even if teachers don't have that freedom, they are taking that freedom, right? There's like,
they're academic.
Hey,
shout out to Dr. Christopher Emden. Yes. And there's subversive pedagogy. Like, so there are people who are, even if they don't have the space, they're making the space and they're pushing against what Dr. Angela Davis talks about, the personification of schools, right? So people often talk about the school to prison pipeline, which obviously we need to interrupt, and we don't need our schools, funneling people through the incarceration system. We also don't need schools to be more and more militarized and like prisons and like places that don't have windows that, walk in this line, you can't wear this, you can't do that, like make sure your hair's like
straight and walk this way and talk that way and only it's
yeah. Crazy. And that is not how the children of the 1% go to school. They can wear whatever they want. Like the school where I teach, when I tell you there's no dress code, there is no dress code. Like, and they, and these are conversations we've had, right? Because at first I'm like, oh, that's a lot of skin. But because it's a social justice space, we are like, oh wait, how are they socialized to look at someone's body and to critique that? So I had to do some unlearning because I was used to like, oh wait, I came from a more traditional independent school where they had to wear button-down shirts and skirts, etc. And so then I'm like, so the only rule is like your underwear can't be showing. But like I've seen like sort of like bikini basically. And I had to be used to like, if that's how you want to represent yourself at school, like, I mean, maybe we can ask some questions about it and like, could it be, the media pressure or whatever, but this should be a place where you get to express yourself freely, right? And you can express yourself in, whatever gender expression you want to show up in, however, whatever color hair you want to have, all of that. And I'm here for more freedom for kids in every way that they need to be free. And I think that's how we create the society. How are they going to be able to make decisions in the future if everything has been decided for them? Like, this is how you walk.
Yeah.
This is how you bubble tea.
So important. So, I mean, it just so important. And again, we get to this space where I'm like, where do we go from here? Like, there are just so many conversations that continue needing to be had. And I just sit in gratitude when it comes to recording this podcast, because just in this conversation, there are so many things that I want to take back and think about. But before we kind of start to round out the conversation, I just want you to like what's the action step that you would want an educator to take after listening to this conversation? So all that we have been able to talk through and walk through and kind of ponder about in this space, what is something that actionable that you would want for an educator to do after they've listened to this?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think there's probably lots of different types of educators who will come to this conversation. So since it's called Black on Black Education, first speak to Black educators, because those are my heart. And in the schools where I've taught, I haven't taught with many Black educators, but the Black educators that I've taught with, like, we've definitely created community and held it down for our students of color and the families of color. And so I would say to Black educators, you are enough. I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves. And yes, we do want to be excellent for our students, but to recognize that walking in every day with your head held high in a society that makes it difficult. I think Lucille Clifton has a poem that says something about, like, rejoice with me or celebrate with me that things that tried to kill me didn't. Sorry, Lucille Clifton, that I'm not quoting you right. Maybe in the show notes we'll link the but I know that the thing is, like, we've already accomplished so much. And so I want us to be able to celebrate that, because it's been very hard for every educator, period, especially the last 3 years. But, like, Black educator, like, that we logged into the Zoom after the Breonna Taylor non-verdict, that we logged back into the Zoom after watching white supremacists brazenly take over the Capitol, and then, this attack on, trying to gaslight us like this didn't even happen. It's a lot that we're doing, and that we still show up for our kids. Which is not to say that there is not anti-Blackness sometimes in Black communities, but I choose to believe that most of us can reject the things that, maybe we were trained in one way, but we still show up in other ways. Also, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned, like, where is education? Like, I think about the other ways that we educate, like, so maybe in our houses of worship, in our neighborhoods, and, like, like the ways that we even just move through space. And I know a lot of Black educators who are doing that. So I want them to just keep your head held high, keep shining, keep being brilliant, being who you are, and keep being an example, because they do see us and they're watching us.
Right.
For other educators who might find their way into this podcast, I actually went to a workshop today. It's our Progressive Teaching Institute at my job. And the presenter, Dr. Liza Toulousan, who has the book called The Identity Conscious Educator. Shout out to Dr. Toulousan, who I've actually known since we were in our 20s, like before either of us were doctors. And her husband is also an educator, Jorge Vega. Shout out to him. But anyway, one of the things she said at the beginning of her keynote was, if you're at a 2, like, so she was talking about critical consciousness and, like, how much do you do this work with adults, with kids, like, when you hear things, and how committed are you to it, and is it your priority? She said, if you're at a 2 now, she was like, I don't need you to get to a 10, but what's the step you can take to get to a 3? So if I'm at a 2 now, what can I dial up a little bit? How can I tune in, raise my awareness to get to a 3? So if I'm at a 7, how can I get to an 8? So I would say to all educators, including the Black educators I spoke to first, like, thinking about what is the next right step that is taking us in the direction of where we want to go.
Right.
It just made me think of do the next right thing.
Well, I mean, we say to teachers, we say to students, we say to people all the time about meeting people where they are, and that's what that means. It's, it's you if you have a conversation with somebody and they're very far, politically, ideologically from where you are, you could just fight and act, like cast aspersions and you're this and you're this and completely unproductive stuff. Or you can say, okay, let me understand where this person is and just try to get them one step further. And I've said it on the podcast before, and I'll say it again. It's my own personal. I really think I came up with this. I really think this is a mindset I did. When I communicate with people, I'm in a conversation. I first try to get them to say like something that I said was interesting enough to get that kind of question mark, and then I try to move them from there, because once they're there, they can move a little bit further. I try to get them to be like, wow, that was kind of, like I'm getting a little bit more. And then the next step, I try to take them to wow, where it's just like, oh, blew their mind. They're all the way over here. And it may happen in one conversation and it may not. But if you try to go from I'm not listening to anything you got to say to wow, I can guarantee that you are absolutely positively not going to get there. So, as we round up the conversation, you spoke to students. You spoke to educators, and what's the things that you would want to share with them. Before we go, I want to also know what you'd like to say to young people. Like, what are some things that they should be doing as they approach an educational journey? Some of them like education, some of them don't. What are some things that you would want to say to young people?
So I'm going to start with another quote. So this is from Sweet Honey in the Rock song, Ella Song. There's a line that says, "To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. If we can just shine the light on them, they'll carry us through the gale." To young people, I would say to follow your heart. And I think there's a lot that young people intuitively know that they need to hold on to that learning. I think sometimes schools socialize the freedom dreams out of young people, but they probably had them when they first started. I'm thinking about my niece who's starting school. Like, she already has really strong ideas of right and wrong and what she wants and freedom and, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And I think schools make you like shrink yourself. And so I would say, don't shrink. And resist some of what's coming your way. Like, if you can hold on to the part of yourself that where you feel good about yourself. I'd also say, this has been, a rough time for educators, but it's really been a rough time for young people. And I'm thinking about, like, if I'm having these pandemic ponderings of like, what is going on here? And I have 40 some years on the planet. Can you imagine if you were 11 and like you were at school and the next day for a year and a half, you're on the computer, but maybe you're on the phone because your sibling is on the computer, like it's like, and the white supremacists and all the stuff that is like really ridiculous and very incredibly frustrating for me. And I'm like, wait, you're trying to control our bodies and we can't vote, but you're not going to ban the assault weapons in the class. Like, there's so much that's so infuriating. But as Mariam Kaba says, hope is a discipline. So I would say, young people, you need to keep your hope. You can inspire us because we will see you. Like, the same way we saw young people in the streets in the summer of 2020, and that wasn't the first time, but like the same way young people led us through the civil rights movement and the Children's March. Like, I think young people have had the ability to lead, and I think sometimes adults have gotten in the way and not let them lead. I'm grateful. Another thing about the school where I've been able to teach, the young people, it's a place where student leadership is really encouraged. But in 2019, the young people at my school shut it down for 4 days. They made a movement called Students of Color Matter, and chose not to come out the administration building. Like, they came prepared with their sleeping bags, and actually security was in because they thought they were going on an overnight trip. But they came in and they strategically, so it was led by students of color, but they strategically deployed their white allies. So they had them at the door. So that,
come on, looking at South Africa.
Yeah. So I'll definitely drop that link of like there's it made national news, but there's a great Teen Vogue article about it. But anyway, the demands that they came up with of like, we need more teachers of color, we need a more diverse curriculum, we need to have Black studies and Indigenous studies in the school, and they modeled it after a protest 50 years earlier at our same school.
Wow.
And the short version of like how it got resolved is that the school, like, so many of the faculty, obviously we were on the side of the kids, but we didn't know about it. But like, many of the faculty are bringing them donuts and that kind of stuff and like letting them in the room. And the admin, like, it's not that they didn't support, but they're also like, like, we need to have a school like after by day 3 or 4. But anyway, one of the things they thought to do to try to mediate it is they reached out to some of the adults who were part of it 50 years before. And one happened to be a senator. I think his name is Assemblyman Keith Wright. And thinking that they'll help them see the reason and this is how we're going to negotiate. But then when those folks got in the room, they were like, wait, their list of demands is the same thing we were demanding 50 years ago. And they were on the side of the kids. And they're like, they're staying in here until y'all come with it.
Wow.
So fast forward a couple years, like, we're actually still trying to bring those demands to fruition in our classroom. And some of that work we had already been working on. But like, it's helpful to have student leadership to hold our feet to the fire of like, yes, like, so when I'm creating my syllabus, which voices do I have? Like, we now have a new requirement to graduate from the school called the Adler requirement, where you have to take a history or English course in I can't remember their exact words, because I don't think they say like marginalized identity, because they purposely don't want it to be like, we only honor the pain, right? So it's not like, oh, the Black family lost their farm, oh, the next family is learning to assimilate, like that. You can be rooted in the love and the joy in that community.
I like that.
Yeah, and so then the adults and the students together worked on this framework that now it's a rigorous criteria that teachers have to run their syllabus through in their plans for the year in order to get it approved to meet this designation, which is now a requirement to graduate from our school. And that came from student leadership.
On intentionality. Like, I mean, one, if you know a young person, clip that little piece and make sure that they're hearing and knowing that there are young people out there doing work so similarly to them. And then on the other side of it, it's how do we get schools that are for predominantly Black and brown children to move with the intentionality that we can move for students whose parents and families have the money to put them in places and spaces where they can receive an education so intentional, right? Like, how do we begin to move with intentionality? And so for me, that's the question that we have to be asking ourselves all the time in this fight. And so, I mean, this is one of the longest podcasts we've had in a while.
Add one piece to that, only because because you know me, I very rarely, I try not to evil people, and I try not to look at the, that dichotomy. But the reality is that schools like the ones that you teach at are looking to create the leaders, and then schools like the ones that other, the traditional public schools in low income communities are looking to create the workers and the, and then the prison population. It's that it feels like there's an active effort to have things operate in that direction. And we're going to have to fight, diligently and hard, against that. So,
and in addition to fighting hard against, create the new.
Touche.
Create the new. All of the energy, time that we continue to put into fighting against them, we are not putting into creating for us. And so we gotta create for us. This is one of the longest podcast episodes we've had in a while, and I am grateful for it because I have eaten up all 59 minutes and 5 seconds of this conversation. But we wanna roll it out to, how do people contact you? How do they reach out? Like, how do folks engage with you and the work that you do? Whether it be at NYU or just with young people in general?
Yes. Well, email still works. I know it's so not social media-y. But yeah, so I think my easiest email is my NYU email, which is trm266@nyu.edu. But I am on social media. I'm not on Twitter as much as I should be, but here's hoping that the podcast can launch me to actually checking it and making some tweets. But my Twitter is @Tinia_speaks. And I'd love to be able to continue the conversation there.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for this. I really we definitely need to do coffee after this, because there's so much more I want to talk to you all about.
We meeting up. And so last but certainly not least, our final question gives you the opportunity to become the interviewer, and we become the interviewees. So is there something on this topic or any of the topics we talked about, a question that you have for us?
And I meant to think of this, and then I forgot. You know what? The thing that's standing out most in this conversation is your father-daughter relationship, and it's making me think about families in schools, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you think we could create, to use your term, Eva, how do we build on what we already do in Black families? How can schools learn from family relationships that work?
It's the first time anybody's asked us that. That's a good one.
Love.
I guess I will start, and I'll say, because this popped in my mind earlier and I didn't say it. It's just the idea of intergenerational conversations, intergenerational connection, intergenerational learning. Like, that is Black on Black education. It's when, the matriarch, the patriarch of the family, who is 90 years old, 85 years old, and they crack the whip, and they but they have a willingness to listen to the 6-year-old when the 6-year-old is sitting on their lap, and that they, in that willingness, they know that they could learn from that 6-year-old. Like that, I talk about spirit a lot. That's a spirit, to be a person who's 90 that knows that they can learn from a 6-year-old. And I think what that does is it creates there's just a vulnerability that happens where it makes that 6-year-old that might otherwise be like, whatever, old man, you don't know what you're talking about, respect what they're doing. It's just you've shared with me, I'm going to share with you, and we can clearly learn from each other. So just the idea of intergenerational connections and connectivity, I think that could lead to schools learning from what we get from families.
And I think for me, it's like leading with love. I think that even in the most chaotic families, or the families that you have been through hell and back, there's still a commitment to love each other, right? And I think that sometimes, I'll hear educators say, I'm not their friend, or I'm not their mother, or I'm not their this. And I'm like, you don't have to be any of those things, but you do have to be somebody who loves them. Because how do you truly care about the outcome of a student's education and what they're going to get if you don't love them, right? And so I have kids I don't like, but I love you, and I care about what happens to you, and I care about how you feel about yourself, right? And I understand that so much of the ways you're showing up in this classroom is because of how you feel about yourself. And I want to be able to work and engage with you around how we have intimate conversations, not only about this content, but also about you and who you are. And so I think that if schools, to our point in the earlier part of the conversation, created enough flexibility, it's not how do we mold and shift a little bit the education system that currently exists. How do we like make some really hard and fast decisions around like maybe kids do need to have in high school. I teach in a high school context, like a lot closer of a schedule to college than they do to what high school currently looks like, because then it creates this incredible amount of space in the school day that even if kids are coming in 5 days a week, there's all this space for individual support, for working with each other. Like there's all of this space for that. But because we want to make these tiny little incremental kind of changes, we put ourselves in positions where the love gets snuffed out because I'm tired, because I'm burnt out, because I'm irritated, because I'm tired. So the only way I can answer your question is just like lead with love, and make decisions intentionally based off of the fact that we should love every single child that comes into our school building. Again, you don't gotta like them. And you definitely not gonna like them all the time. But you can 100% love and care about what happens to them enough to do the things that need to happen in order to support them and allow them to have the education they deserve.
Right.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Bettina Love, in her book really argues that you can't teach Black and brown children if you don't love Black and brown children.
Right.
So yeah, more love, more joy. And I love this idea of intergenerational conversations, which I hear it as taking young people seriously. Right? There is a school of thought that's like you should be seen and not heard, but like I think in our communities we actually do see our young people and take your time, that's all right, like those things. I'm thinking about the young people who took the time to hear me give my first Easter speech at church and be like, no, do it louder. Let me, that's Black on Black education. Oh no, stand up straight. Let me hear it again. And that's like, I'm 7, but you're taking me seriously and you see greatness in me.
Right.
And you're loving me enough to make sure that I'm presenting my best.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tinia, thank you for this. This has been fantastic. When Eva talked to you the first time, she was just like, "Yo, you gonna want to talk to her?" Like, and she did not lie at all. So this was amazing. We do look forward to continuing the conversation, coffee, dinner. Like we're definitely gonna stay in touch. So we appreciate you, and to everybody else, this is another episode of the Black on Black Education Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you, and see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Bye, y'all.